Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to the Weekend Wellness Hour show. Today we have a returning guest, Kirstin Carey, friend of mine and amazingly talented healer who has a lot of background in various different aspects. She is a certified holistic nutritionist, a professional chef. She's had her own business or her own restaurant. She's a neuro-linguistic programming practitioner, so NLP for those of you who are familiar with that. Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Practitioner, certified in EFT and TFT types of tapping. And she's also a biofield healing practitioner. So we are bringing her on to talk about this wide variety of techniques that she has under her belt that she can use to help people rewire the soul, rewire emotions, and just basically how she helps people. So thanks for coming on, Kirstin.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here again.
It's wonderful. So we know a little bit about your background, but we want to dive into some of the different techniques that you've learned and how does that really kind of rewire us? Because sometimes we're stuck in something and we think that's the way we have to be. I remember talking to a friend several years ago who said, I am the way I am and I'm not going to change. And a lot of people are taught that once you get to an adulthood, you're it. That's who you are. So how do we even begin thinking about rewiring what's happening to us or our soul or emotions?
Yep, great question. So, I see physical, mental, emotional they're all connected at all times. If you're having physical issues, there's an emotional component. If you're having a mental challenge, there's a physical component. Like they're all connected. So you can't just say, I'm just going to divvy out this one thing over here and only fix this or only fix this. And unfortunately, I think our standard, traditional, conventional medical system makes us think we are like cars and just pieces of things, parts. But you can't just take out a part and put a new one in and think it's not going to have an impact on the other pieces. So we look at the concept of rewiring, and you have to be willing. So I think you've already said that. Like if I'm in it and I've decided I am this person, I'm not changing, it's frankly not going to change. But if you're actively interested in it changing, that's the first piece. So the body, our brains, we're wired to just do what has kept us alive at this point. It does not care. Our body does not care if we are happy. It does not care if we are healthy. It does not really care. All it cares is, did we not die today? Like that's what it's looking for on like the animal brain level, right?
Right.
So if you want to get above that, you have to first understand that just because you're in a pattern doesn't mean it's good for you, but you've locked into the idea that it's kept me safe. So once we start looking at that, say, okay, well, what is the process here? Why do you believe you've been safe to this point? And we have traumas, negative and positive traumas, and a lot of people don't even wrap their head around the positive trauma piece. But what it is a pattern that we believed was good for us, so we kept doing it. And then we shoved it into autopilot, and then we didn't think about it anymore. We have to pull it out of autopilot and then look at it from the conscious brain and say, okay, why are we still doing this? How is this serving us? Why do we believe we're safer if we keep doing this thing and going forward with that? I'll give you a really quick example. So when I was 4, I was outside playing with my dad. My dad grew up in a household that boys were the best and girls were kind of, sorry about you kind of energy. And so my dad really, really wanted to help me, be good in the world and help to train me more like a boy, stereotypical boy, right? So he had me playing a lot of sports and stuff right out of the gate. We were playing in the yard. He was at least using a softball with me at this point, and he throws it, hits the glove, ricochets off of it, hits me in the face, splits my lip open. I'm bleeding. He scoops me up and runs into the kitchen where my mother's making dinner. She looks up, and her firstborn is bleeding from the face, so she's upset. My dad, however, is beaming, smiling ear to ear. My mother's like, what is wrong with you? And he goes, look at her. She's not crying. And he was so proud. Now, I was probably just too stunned to even realize that I should have had any other reaction other than stunned.
Yes.
But I remember at 4 years old thinking, Daddy loves me, I'm not crying.
Oh my.
That's a positive trauma. It's a piece of our identity we lock into. Because, as kids, what we're looking for is the approval of the people in charge of us.
Yes.
Because they keep us alive. So again, what keeps us alive? Daddy loves me, I'm not crying. And then I started looking for proof and evidence that that was true. And our brains just automatically do this. So then I kept finding other things. My dad had the whole crying thing. Don't show emotion. It's better if you don't, if you can hold it together and not fall apart. Like, that was a big deal for me because my father loved me more. Again, 4-year-old brain. So I continued through the rest of my life, well, not the rest of it, but as I continued to get older, I locked that down as part of who I was. And what makes me awesome is being strong, not showing emotion. And what I ended up with was multiple autoimmune diseases, celiac specifically, and Hashimoto's, because I learned how to suck it up, push it down, shove it to the side, and not process it. I never released it. So if you look at that, it has to go somewhere, right? So a lot of people don't think of emotions as being a thing. So if you think of them as a tangible thing that goes into your body, if it's not released or rewired effectively, it's going to become something else. So it needs to manifest in however you're going to pay attention to it. So it could manifest into shoulder pain or stomach pain or digestive distress or migraines or skin issues. So I also didn't have great relationships in my life because I couldn't process the emotion and be with the moment, be in the emotion. And so it caused other challenges for me in my relationship. So I had to learn how to accept that emotions aren't bad, that I wasn't a weak person because I had them, and that people were still going to love me even if I had them. Huge piece. So the rewiring process was even the understanding that this positive trauma, I thought this was good. I had to better understand how the rest of my body went, no. Yeah. So even understanding what's underlying, why you are who you are, how you behave the way you do, is it truly who you are? Is it who you thought you were supposed to be? And then how do we do that? So the first thing is even understanding it's there. The second piece is bringing it up so you can even go, look at this, I can do something with this. And then understand, what do we do with that information? How do we rewire it? So we have a variety of techniques that we use with the coaching team here because everybody thinks differently as far as what they think is positive, what they think is negative, why they see it as positive, what their perception is. So we basically take all these different techniques. So between the NLP and the frequency healing and the cognitive behavioral therapy approach and pattern interrupting and RIM, we take them and kind of push them together and then roll them out and then start peeling them apart to see how the client responds to each of the different pieces.
Okay. Right, because I can imagine based on your experiences, your body, how you operate, your personality, that would, maybe you are drawn to one of the techniques a little bit more so than the other.
Exactly, because they feel safer. And for some clients, energy work would not feel safe. For some clients, tapping would not feel safe for whatever reason. It doesn't mean they're, woo-woo and all the things. It's their perception would not make them feel it was safe. So we have to get into a space where we say, how do we get you into a place that you're safe enough, that you're able to bring up this thing? Because most of us, we all have things that block information from us because we have defense mechanisms. Sometimes the defense mechanism is, I'm not going to remember this thing right now. I'm not going to be able to see this. Even though it's standing right in front of me, I'm not going to be able to see it because I feel safer when I don't. Doesn't mean it's not there. It's like a little kid going, well, I can't see you, so you must not be able to see me. The other person's like, no, I can see you perfectly. But we do these things to ourselves. So when you've created a defense mechanism to protect yourself, you can't see the defense mechanism. Yeah. So a lot of the processes we are using is to help find those things looking around the side of the defense mechanism.
Got it.
And then once the person's able to even see it, they need to feel safe in the process of being able to process it so it can be rewired. And then it's like, okay, well, I've opened a space now where I kept believing this for so many years. I get why it's not serving me anymore. Maybe it did at some point. What do I do with the opening now? I've moved that out. What do I put in its place? And we want to flip the coin, as we call it here. Flip the coin and find the thing that serves you better based on your trajectory now. So some of it's, what do we put in its place? What new pattern do we help you create so that you feel more successful, you feel more safe, you feel like you're on a better trajectory? So I don't think, at least my experience so far, is that there's no one technique that fixes it all.
Okay.
And I've been through trainings where the coach who was training us, or the practitioner who was training us, is like, this is the answer. And I'm like, not for 100% of the people, but maybe that's my perception. I think it's a combination, because different stages, you're going to need different approaches, because your brain is too smart sometimes for its own good, and it'll shut you off over here if something's working too well.
Yeah.
Because fear shows up.
It does. And so for your example, where you're a young little girl and you got hit and you had your dad's responses, did it take a while for you to rewire the effects of that memory? Because I mean, that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is change the effects of what that memory generated, so our behavior changes. We can still remember the event, but what it caused as an impact, we can change that.
What I like to do with most people, and most traumas, whether they're positive or negative, there is a positive side to the trauma and there's a negative side to the trauma. So what you need to do is understand where both sides live. There's never all one thing. And I know this sounds crazy, but you could give me a very negative trauma like sexual abuse. Most people would say, well, sexual abuse is just negative, negative, negative. I'm like, but something positive came through it. And I know that sounds like I'm being, just kumbaya. It's not. When you can find what it helped you to become that serves you, we learn how to live in the balance of the trauma so that you no longer are in fear of it. And when people can't see anything other than the black and white versions, this is all good, this is all bad, they're going to stay in a trauma.
Right.
So it's even understanding what's the other side of this trauma. And I've had my own negative traumas in my past, and I've gone through that process too. Where it takes a long time is when somebody isn't ready or willing to let go of their perception of the trauma.
Right.
Because it serves them more sometimes to not let go.
Right, because they may be able to hold on to an anger related to it, or something that keeps them able to continue what they think is continuing through life, because they can have another emotion tied to it.
Right. Like, okay, so I'm sure you've seen those people on Facebook who are just every kind of other day, it seems like there's some drama going on. Pray for me for this. Please send your good hope for this. My father's in this. My daughter's in this. This has happened. This is awful. My house is being taken, whatever it is. But it's never one thing. It's always like another and another and another. People, I feel so bad for them. Something's always happening to them that goes wrong. And I'm like, yes. Oh, sorry. I have a dog who has a little cone. She's got her cone on. She likes to shake a lot. But they sit there and they say, well, I keep doing this. And we feel bad for these people because that's just awful to see so many traumas. But at the same time, we're looking at that and saying, what is she positive, this person that's doing it, what is she getting positively out of doing that? And they're like, no, her life is terrible. What's the positive? Or else she wouldn't keep doing it. It's the support. How much support? Look how many people show up. 115 people are giving her messages, or liking or feeling bad for her, or calling her. There's a whole level of support that shows up that we become addicted to chemically and emotionally. And so that happens, we start to stay in that frequency, unfortunately. The drama frequency, the chaos frequency, because we're at least getting something over here. So usually I can go back and say, okay, what did things look like for you from 0 to 7 years old? And typically it was a lack of support, or a belief of lack of support.
Got it. That makes sense, because I do have friends, and I'll even ask those friends, do you have close friends where you live that you can hang out with and talk to? And a lot of times they don't. So they use social media to generate that support, because there is a lack in their home life of getting that support. And same thing, I never really asked about the childhood, but I know the childhood of these people, and yes, there was a lack of support. So I can see how it develops.
So we use some frequency healing where we help the person find their frequency balance. And it's more of an energy work kind of component, biofield healing as well. Similar thing where I'm not doing something to you, like I'm not giving you a frequency. And it's not necessarily audio, like it's a feeling where it helps you find what frequency do I need right now to balance me out. If I'm too spun out over here, I need something that's going to ground me. If I'm too grounded and I can't see the future in a way that I want to, I need something more up here. So how do I find, again, it all comes back to balance. So how do we find your version of balance? If you're anxious all the time, why are you so spun out? You're so attached to the future going wrong. What was it in the past that caused you to constantly have to be aware of the future all the time? And a lot of these processes help us kind of peel them apart. Go ahead.
When you do the frequency healing, are you asking people to visualize a state of themselves at a different frequency to help pull them to imbalance? Or how are you, if I'm really ramped up, emotionally reactive, how are you using frequency healing to kind of ground me?
Yeah, great question. So it's the frequency healing to me has been really fascinating because there is no expectation on this one. There is no, you don't preset an idea or a thought. What I like it for is it brings stuff up to the surface in a safe way. Some people have very dramatic responses to it, where I can do it like across Zoom, I can do it over a phone, I can do it with you in my office. But basically, you just are in the energy that's happening, and your body pulls the frequency it needs. It's kind of like a magnet at that point. I kind of put out all the magnet pieces, and then you just go, this is the one I need right now, and this is the one I'm going to reject. So it's not like hypnosis where I could like make you cluck like a chicken. I don't have that kind of power with this. It's the idea of where your body starts feeling the frequency. So I'm sure you've had this experience. And, since I just mentioned one of my dogs are amazing in this. Babies are amazing for this. They all work off of frequency all the time. They're not really communicating verbally, obviously. They're communicating through energy. So if you've ever watched a dog, someone walks into a room and all their hair stands up, they instantaneously know there's a reason to be cautious of this person. They're feeding off of the energy and the frequency of that person. Babies do the same thing. You can hand one baby to one person and they're crying, they hand it to the next person and they're not. There's a frequency that they literally feed off of from the beginning. Adults learn how to shut that frequency down, and then we don't trust our own instincts. Right. This allows you to find that again in a safe way, where I'm not trying to make you do anything. But what happens is they'll have either dramatic responses or a response, I don't even want to say dramatic, in the session, where they will have a memory pop up, or there's a movie that starts playing in their head, or a thought starts to pop up, or their physical response changes. I had a client who, she physically was in my office, which we don't do a lot of work with people in the office. It's mostly like this. And she was actually at my office, and I started working with her, and we did like a 20-minute session. And about 6 or 7 minutes into the session, she literally, and this is more of a dramatic response, her body started like vibrating, shaking, and especially in like her belly. And I was like, okay, clearly there's some major trauma here. And I had worked with this client before for years, and she was a therapist, and she had done all the work and was trained in all the things. And so I was working with her, and every time I came back to like her midsection, it would like almost violently start shaking. I came back around, I was like, okay, something is up. So she halfway through the middle, she kind of looked at me and said, one of my dogs actually came into the room and was like so enamored by what was happening. She wanted to get on the table, which this dog is normally chill, never comes in, but had to be there. And I was like, okay, something really big is happening. Yeah. So I had to get this dog down. And then she looked at me and she said, what's wrong with the dog? And she's sobbing. Wow. And I'm like, I don't say anything, just let her go. We get to the end, she sits up and she said, the dog was crying the whole time. What was going on with your dog? And I said, the dog was crying. She said, yeah. And then she goes, I'm crying. And she was soaked, so. I'm like, okay, what happened? And she was still and she said, and then she just couldn't get herself together. She was really, really, really crying. And I had worked with her for a while, so I was like, what is this? Yeah. So she finally started talking about 2 pregnancies that she chose to end earlier on when she was a late teen. Okay. And she's very sorry she did this. Mm-hmm. And the grief was something she never processed. Wow. Shame, all of it. And it was literally showing up for her here. And she goes, I've never told anybody this before.
Oh my, poor thing.
And she just kept crying and kept crying. And I'm like, she's like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm like, so, this session's over. She feels better. She contacted me 2 days later. She's like, I have never felt freer in my life.
Yeah.
And in that case, I had no idea going into this session with her, none. She'd never told me anything close to this story before. And she apparently really hadn't told anybody else. But
Mm-hmm.
the grief lifted. But she was in a space where she found a frequency. She felt safe enough that this was allowed to surface
Mm-hmm.
and come through for her. Now, we worked on a few other things for her to hold that freedom space afterwards to keep
Right.
that pattern going and why it took till now.
Mm-hmm.
So I used some cognitive behavioral therapy with her, pattern interruption, pattern holding, after the fact. But it was the thing that kind of shook her loose. It's kind of like an etch a sketch where you can kind of shake it up and it all clears.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that. And I know it sounds a little hokey when I say it that way, but we are attracted to the frequency we want. We can feel the energy of what's going on around us. And if we're feeling agitated or upset or connected, and a lot of our clients are more empathic, they feel the energies of people around them, or they at least know that they're connected to it. You may be even feeling people's stuff that's not even yours. This
Right.
helps to kind of surface that and then help you see it,
Right.
clear it, deal with it, talk about it.
That's amazing. So and you touched on cognitive behavioral therapy. So can you
Mhm.
go into that a little bit more, what that
Yep.
means so that people can understand, okay, why might I use this, or why you might use that with someone to elicit a change?
Yeah, I love CBT. Some therapists will use this. Actually, the woman I learned from, it was a therapist, clinical therapist. What I love about it, it's more watching patterns, understanding language, understanding behavior, and helping somebody take that behavior, understand why that's serving them, and then what we can do to shift it. So you can take somebody who says, okay, so there's a couple like words I always watch for people. Somebody who says the word should a lot. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
know I should do this. Well, I should be doing this. And I'm like, you're shoulding all over yourself. The idea that you should is coming from somewhere else. It's not our true belief. It's the belief of a system outside of us. So a parent, society, our church, our family, whomever.
Mm-hmm.
When we should all of ourselves, it's because we are now in conflict with who we know we are versus who we were told we were supposed to be accepted.
Mm-hmm.
So when you should all over yourself, so that's one of the like cognitive behavioral kind of things. Like I'm behaving a certain way because I think I should based on society, based on what other people say, based on whatever. And if you start watching most people, our school systems, the way our doctors work most of the time, it's based on coercion or based on conditioning. So a lot
Yes.
of behavioral therapy is based on the cognitive behavior. It's understanding what's truly my belief versus the belief of someone else, or I was conditioned to believe this, but is it true?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a question I ask a lot of clients. They'll make a statement. They'll say something very dramatic, like, you know, all fat people are bad. And I'm like, is that true?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, yes. And I'm like, okay, why is it true? And they're like, and then it's like, well, where did it come from? Like, do I actually think that? Or, and it's like, and then if you're thinking that as a statement, a black and white statement all this time, then every time you see someone who you would categorize as fat, you're going to think they're bad. Then
Mm-hmm.
you will be terrified of gaining weight yourself, and then you will think you are bad. And then it comes back to, but do I believe that? Belief is a pretty big thing. Who is it that really believes that? Is it me? And then and within cognitive behavioral therapy, and actually in a lot of training for therapists in general, there's a piece where our brains actually continue to make shifts. 0 to 7, there's a pretty big shift. We're mostly in energy at that point. We're mostly in learn as many things as possible to get into autopilot as we
Mm-hmm.
can. Then 8 is where it kind of shifts, where we start really working more in the cognitive brain, the new learning in a different way. We start to go to like 15 on that one. But the biggest one I see, and most of where our clients are, somewhere between 35 and 55, is
Mm-hmm.
where we hit the question of, do I believe this? Was I led to believe this? So you end up in that conflict, that identity conflict, where, it's the guy who runs off and gets the sports car and the new girlfriend and, all the things that, and we all, that ha 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 version of it, there's a reason that happens because that's when we start seeing mortality. That's when we start seeing who we really are. That's when we start really seeing us as individuals outside of what we were led to believe. And that cognitive shift, that conflict, that can cause a whole lot of stir up in the body.
Yes, definitely. And when you realize that some of the beliefs that were instilled in you that
Mhm.
you thought were your own, but really maybe were your parents, but you also liked those beliefs and you realized they weren't accurate, it's really disruptive to you lose almost a sense of who you are and your identity. Because
Yes.
then you have to go through this whole self-discovery. Well, okay, well now who am I really? And what does that
Yep.
look like? And there's this incoherence between all the parts of your body as you're trying to bumble around to figure this out.
Yep. I can tell you there's two questions I ask people that paralyze most people.
Mhm.
Who are you?
Mhm.
And what is it you really want?
Yeah.
And they're like, it's like, well, I want a new car. I'm like, no, what do you want? What is really the driving force to the new car, to the new this,
Mhm.
and it's like, I don't know. Nobody's ever asked and cared about the answer before. Like, so when we come to that's a conflict unto itself. And again, you really chemically start seeing the shift in the brain somewhere between 35 and 55 to ask those questions. And so I use a lot of that's where cognitive behavioral therapy comes in really well too, because it's the why. Well, what made you think that? What evidence do you have that that is correct? Where did you get that information? What
Mhm.
evidence are you? I mean, basically, our entire day is us looking around for evidence that we are who we really say we are. And is there proof or not? And that's when you see people getting into fights on Facebook, and because they're defending their identity and their belief system. Because if what their belief system is wrong, you're right. Like, what happened? Who am I?
Mhm.
Was it all a lie?
Right.
And that's where it starts to get really rough.
Those are hard questions too. And it's nice to have someone guiding you through those questions to create a safe space. I mean,
Hmm.
it's kind of like you said, at the end of the day, are we safe or are we not? That's kind of how our body operates.
Yeah.
So, with some of the other techniques that you employ, like the tapping or the RIM, how do those tie in? Are they tools to help people feel safer or um, create a new existence?
So the tapping, I think, is a really great tool for you to find a way to feel safer.
Mhm.
So if because there's basically a couple different things that are happening. Sometimes you're in the immediate trigger. We're in the panic. We're in the anxiety. We're in the panic attack. We're in I can't breathe. I need to give people tools to get out of that moment.
Mhm.
So tapping is a really great tool for that. And there's a specific breathing technique we'll put people in. Like if you've ever seen somebody like on TV or actually in real life where they take the brown paper bag and they have them breathing into the brown paper bag. Do you know why that works?
I know that they're saying that you're rebreathing your own air to calm you down, but I have
It's
no
actually
clue. I haven't really
the
thought
reason
about
it actually works, the reason it rewires the system, it happens fast, is because you're now paying attention to the bag going in and out, the sound, the actual visual, that somebody gave you a job to focus on. You actually are focused on the breathing. That's literally why it works, and it works so fast. It has nothing to do with oxygen. Because I thought all the time, I was like, oh, it's some oxygen thing.
it.
It's not. It takes the brain in a stuck space where it's just reverberating on this one thing, and it's going over and over and over. It's in a stuck cycle. I have to be panicked. I have to be panicked. And half the time they don't even know why they're panicked. This now refocuses, trains the brain to break the pattern, to get out of it long enough that enough oxygen gets into the system at that point, tells the body, well, there must be no bear because we couldn't possibly be breathing better if there was really no bear. And then it chemically shifts the system.
Okay.
So I look at some of these techniques and I find tapping to be a really good one. If you're in a panic, we have to do something that helps you get out of that moment, or you can't do anything else. Then we start alleviating the number of times you get into these triggered spaces. Now, how do we hold the non triggered space longer so you feel safer most of the time rather than very few moments of the time? Because again, if we look at patterns, if your brain is used to chaos and fear and panic, when you're not in those spaces, it'll ask you, why are we not in the space we're familiar with? We must be in danger, so let's go back here. And it will chemically shoot stuff into your system to change that. It will emotionally start having you heightened, everything else must be wrong. So this is where a lot of people will use yoga and breathing techniques and some of these pattern interrupts and not be able to sustain it longer than the yoga class.
Yep.
Second they get outside and get in the car, they're back here.
Mm-hmm.
Because this was actually not safe because it
Yeah.
wasn't familiar enough anymore.
Got it. That makes
So
sense.
tapping, I think, can be great, but I don't see it as a long-term solution. I see it helping you get out of the moment, but you need more things to pattern it so this is safe again, this calm stays.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And then you were asking about RIM?
RIM, yeah.
Yeah. So one of our coaches on the team, she is a master level at this, and it's, regenerating images in memory. So a lot of times we will have certain places in our memory which we lock down and hide from ourselves. But interestingly, a memory, a vision, a dream, a moment you're actually seeing right now, as far as the brain is concerned, they're the same. So a visualization of what could happen in the future is still the same to you as a memory from the past, as where it goes in the brain. So if you are constantly riding on the idea that you're not safe and that you're panicked and this isn't going to work, it's like it happened because you just keep seeing it. So RIM, what a lot of times RIM will do is it'll help you find some of these memories, but also create new visions. So your brain can override an old memory like it didn't happen or it happened in a safer way.
Okay.
So RIM is a very specific process. It's a pretty long process too. Most of the RIM sessions are about an hour and a half or so, can go longer. So they are kind of involved, but there's a very specific process, but you actually guide the process without realizing it. She's just the facilitator helping you through. So again, just like hypnosis, we're not trying to get you to cluck like chicken or do something. We're trying to help you find the process, find the vision, lock it down, and then recreate what actually occurred so you feel safe with it. You can't change the actual thing that happened, but you can change the perception or the safety of it.
Right.
So I've also created, using a lot of NLP, but I also take a lot of cognitive behavioral pieces to it too, and some tapping. I've created, we call them visualization sessions, where it can completely rewire a moment in time, shift it so it's no longer what it was, give you the vision of what you wanted it to be, and then it like overrides it. And I can do that in like 20 minutes, which is pretty cool. And then I've done sessions where they're recorded now, where anyone could take that session and then use it for whatever purpose. So this is where you can actually go into it with a particular purpose. Like I want to rewire this moment in time and make it this. And the process you take them through to do that. And frankly, I've never seen it not work for someone to get them at least a little further than where they are. Just like everything, some people respond to it way better and they get like years of stuff just dissipated, and sometimes it's a little thing. But we have to keep reinforcing that we're still safe, or else you'll lose some of the forward movement.
And then do you use NLP to help people kind of keep the gains? Because often how we speak to ourselves and influences our thoughts and our behavior. So working through words that we use just in our daily life, I can imagine that would help us create a different type of impact and a more longer lasting one.
Yeah, absolutely. Because language is so phenomenal. Our attachment to words is so phenomenal. Like I know if I'm watching a client or anyone, frankly, you can tell they're in a triggered moment and they're like in a little kid space when they use certain words like, you never do this. I always end up having to do this for everybody. This isn't fair. Like there's certain, like you see it. What's really literally happening is there was a moment in time, we call them wounded children here. There was a moment in time you created a wounded child. Typically, that wounded child appeared before you were 7. And that wounded child started locking down on a belief system or a perspective. Like, if I'm emotional, my dad won't love me. And you lock down on that moment. And then when you're triggered, that wounded child is in fear. Like, if anybody ever talked to me until I worked on this, if somebody talked to me like they thought I was like too weak. Like, the stereotypical, like, you show up and the guy says, I'm sorry, it's a guy. It always is a guy in my head. The guy says, oh, what's the matter? Are you emotional today? That would set me off. Like, I'd be like, this isn't right. And I was so angry. But I could hear myself saying, you always say that. Like what's happening is you're literally being pushed back into that original moment or the most significant moment where you felt that challenge happening. And all of the pieces that piled onto that moment that secured you that was bad all show up at once. So that's how you can go from I'm totally fine to somebody having like a side comment and you're like done, you're up here, you're upset, you're triggered so bad you can't even process what's happening. you literally will go back to whatever age the most significant one was and like lose language. Like it's almost like you can only communicate as a 10-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's words you lost, there's ways to process, you're in literal I could die response danger.
Fight or flight. Yep.
Mm-hmm. So that's where the NLP language comes in. You want to start looking at the emotional language, the language that triggers people, the ones that set them off. And they typically will, without realizing it, tell you what these words are. They'll say stuff. Like I had a client yesterday, she had a traumatic relationship with a guy when she was younger. He ends up being very physically and sexually abusive to her. She marries him, and he continues being that way through most of their marriage. She separates from him 5 years ago and then never divorces him, but she's separated. Well, there's still a connection there, and there's still a reason she hasn't done the divorce. So I was talking to her, and she said she's explaining this part of her story, which I knew at this point, but she was explaining it. And she said, and what kind of person allows somebody to treat them that way and then stays married to them for 30 years? I mean, what kind of person does that?
Oh,
So, of course, my question was, what kind of person does do that?
yeah.
She goes, well,
Yeah.
huh? And it's like she's already berating herself the whole time, beating herself up, but she has an image in her head of what kind of person does that. And she's using it to continue to beat herself up with, even though she's separated. So it's an interesting dynamic when you watch it, because I just mirror back a lot of times their own language, and then it stops them and they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, she's already in a space where she's triggered by the kind of person, the disgusting kind of person that would do that. So we pull that out. Like, okay, well, let's discuss that version of you. But that's her vision of who she really is if you listen. She presents as this beautiful, amazing, awesome, strong, helps other women. She's also like all the things. But at the same time, she's internally, she sees herself as this broken, awful, allowed myself to stay in this relationship. I'm like, oh, well, let's talk about that version of you.
And that's hard. It's hard to piece that apart and actually face the reality, or even dive into, why did I say, and face, okay, the reason I said was because of this. Do I really want to admit that to myself? That's hard.
Yeah. And then and that's where you see tears, or that's where you see or the fear shows up, or oh, I didn't mean that. Well, I didn't. And it's like, okay, you did, but I'm again, no judgment. And what's tough is working with a practitioner who you don't feel is judging, or you don't feel is trying to lead you somewhere specific, or that you feel safe enough to say this. Like I can tell you, we hear the term or the phrase, I've never told anybody this before, or I've only told one person this before. It's a pretty big deal when a client can get to a point where they feel, I can even show you some of this. But our team here, we're very good at watching for the pieces and then knowing also when to bring them up and when to, sometimes we got to let them slide today because they're not there yet. And that's okay.
Yeah. They are where they are, and you just meet them there. Right?
Yep. And sometimes what's really fun is no matter which process we're using at what point. I mean, I feel like I'm just always just pulling at threads of all of them, but there are moments where if you can help a client pull the right thread, it will unravel pieces you never have to work on. Yeah. Because you've taken out the bottom of it, everything else starts to fall through. You just help them replace. So I'm not a big fan of continuing to beat a dead horse, so continuing to bring up the traumas, continuing to talk about that. Like, let's bring it up, understand where it came from. Now let's work on what we want instead. And that's where a lot of the rewiring comes from, because a lot of talk therapy, people who use cognitive behavioral therapy, a lot of it I think can be dangerous actually, or harmful, re-traumatizing, because they stay in the frequency of the trauma. Let's keep talking about it. Let's keep beating it up. Let's keep you focused on it. And if we're continuing to focus on it, it's never going to get rewired because you're using that pattern over and over.
Yeah, you're keeping in that same brain neurochemistry.
Yep.
And if you keep focusing on it, you perseverate on it, how do you ever change? How do you transform?
Exactly.
It's a difficult game. And I know trauma therapy and helping people through emotional events, it's changed a lot over the years. And I'm glad that there's so many different techniques now. And it's nice to have people like you, practitioners, who recognize there is not one solution. And sometimes it is a multifactorial approach. It
Yeah.
really is.
Yep. And sometimes the client isn't ready for this yet.
Yeah.
So let's start her here. And then when she's ready for this, we'll get there.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes they're like all of a sudden ready where you're like, well, here you go. Let's go to this level. Because sometimes just the realization of where something showed up originally, they're like, oh. And it's like, let's throw this in here now so we can get this and get the new roadways set up. I mean, when I talk about rewiring, there are pathways in your brain that look just like road systems. If we keep driving the same 3 roads over and over and over, we're going to get there without even realizing it. We got to open up some new road systems here and drive them enough that they feel safe and you don't have to consciously think about it all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes you open up a roadway where all these other roads were available. You open up one and all of these other roads become available. You didn't even know.
Yeah.
So this will change people's, like with the frequency session, sometimes we'll have these dramatic responses like in a session, or some people will come out and be like, I don't know, nothing really happened. I don't know what to tell you. And I'm like, just let it sit for the next couple of days, typically 3 to 4. Just see what shifts.
Yeah.
Notice dreaming, notice digestion, notice bowel movements, notice symptoms. Just pay attention for the next 4 days. And then they'll come back and be like, oh my God, I was dreaming every night in ways about these things, or these sudden memories would show back up, or my digestion's just so much better. I don't know why. I'm like, really? You don't know? But it's not everybody responds to the same process the same way.
Okay.
But what it's doing is it's opening up the safety of your subconscious, showing you more stuff.
Got it.
Which is all dreaming really is your subconscious saying, are you ready to deal with this? Should I hide it still and make it look like the neighbor when it's really your dad and it's really this other thing and it's this fear?
Mm-hmm.
That's why our dreams are weird, because if your dream came at you directly, you wouldn't be able to handle it yet.
Yeah.
So a lot of these processes are the same concept as how can I get in there in a safe way where you can at least start seeing smaller pieces, and then you can take that to open up this next piece. Like one of the processes I have people do, if you do want to start opening stuff up, and you're pretty sure you've probably blocked some things, which we all have, every night before you go to bed, you can tell your brain, like literally verbalize this, say it out loud, you're talking to yourself, but literally tell your system, I am open to seeing more.
That's good.
And see what happens over the next week.
Okay.
Say it every night before you go to bed. And just see what happens to what you remember about your dreams, what dreams are showing up, what random thoughts start to appear. Like the guy you haven't seen since high school, all of a sudden you remember this very significant moment in detail like it happened yesterday. That's not random.
Okay. That's awesome. That's a good technique. I'm going to have to do that for the next week and see what
super fun. Yep. Yeah. Because people are like, I don't dream. I'm like, you do. You're just not allowing yourself to see them because they feel frightening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I had heard before, I interviewed some sleep specialists who had said, your nightmares, think of them as your brain is finally processing something.
Yep.
And grateful for them. And
yes. And there's no good, no bad. There is information.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the whole point of all these techniques, they are helping you connect the mental, the emotional, and the physical, which is why tapping works a lot of times. I like people to do dance therapy. I'll tell people, go dance. Go just turn the music on and just dance around your house. Just because it's allowing something that's stuck inside of you to move forward, especially if you're more of a creative person. If you are not moving, especially if you, and you know, I mean, pain, it stops people, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in the space where you've stopped, you're going to stop a literal flow in your brain, in your body, in your system, in your thoughts, and your emotions. Move.
Yep.
Do something, anything. Lay on the floor and roll around, like anything that is going to make you move to get that contact back to the physical, allowing it to express. So it's not just we're going to think our way through this. It's movement, getting outside, getting into the sun, anything that's going to shift what you've done. But if you've just been patterned to just get on the couch and watch TV and shut down, there's a literal flow that gets stopped, which literally stops thoughts and emotions and processing.
Yeah, that's incredible. So now if someone wants to experience some of these techniques with you, how does that happen?
Oh, great question. So they can actually pop onto, actually, you know what, next week, gosh, it's February 26th, sorry. Next week, we have I'm calling it the Hack My Healing Challenge.
Okay.
We're doing 3 days, 90 minutes each day of giving people like a taste, a toe in the water kind of experience on what it's like to work with us. It's
Okay.
totally free. People don't have to pay anything for it. They can go to nourish123challenge.com. It's March 4, 5, and 6.
Okay.
But they can pop on, and then I'll be doing one of the techniques that I use, one of my very favorite ones. That's an NLP kind of frequency shifted over kind of thing. It's like 15 or 20 minutes. They'll get to like literally see it happening. Anthony's going to be on. He's going to be talking about the sciencey kind of side to this. I'll talk about more of the soul emotion side to this. But it's 3 days, so 90 minutes each day. And they'll get, let's put it this way, if they see that and they're like, this is not for me, then it's really super not for them.
Yeah.
Or they can just pop onto our website, nourish123.com, and they can make an appointment, chat with Anthony for 15 or 20 minutes, get a feel for what they're going through, what's happening. He'll really give them some honest feedback on, here's some ideas, or you know what, we need to get deeper into this, and is this the right process for you, how we do what we do.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have a solid program. I'm very aware of that, and we're going to have Anthony on again soon, so it'll be fun to see him next weekend.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really appreciate what you guys are doing. It's very solid. You're very comprehensive, and I appreciate how much time and attention you put into your program. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. I love talking to your audience. And again, if people, especially practitioners, because I know you have practitioners watching this too,
Absolutely.
are interested in understanding this, let us know. I mean, every now and then we mentor some practitioners, or we can tell them where to go to find out how to do this stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate it. Any last thing that you want to share with us today?
One thing for anybody who's out there is like, oh, I've done it, been there, done that. I promise you, you're not beyond healing. You are not too broken to heal. There is an answer for you. You just haven't fully gotten the pieces that you need for your unique healing together. So deep breath. I promise you there's an answer.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. It's such a pleasure to have you on. And
It's good to see you again.
Thank you. And all of you, thank you so much for joining us today. Have a great rest of your weekend. We'll see you next week. Take care. Bye.